Zoey is too drunk for this dystopia. Chapter 21. The fence around the festival grounds did not mark the boundaries of the festivities, only the line between paying and non-paying attendees. Outside the fence were the tents and RVs of travelers who were happy to experience the vibe from a distance. They were most dense around the north gate, as that's where one could find all the vendors selling the contraband that wasn't allowed in the festival itself, often intended to be consumed right there at the gate. As Dee Dee's motorcycle rolled through it, Zoey thought the haphazard arrangement of dusty vehicles and temporary structures had the look and feel of a post-apocalyptic settlement. At the moment, it was welcoming a flood of refugees from the festival who weren't into the riot portion of the evening. Meanwhile, the next bands had taken the stage and were playing right through the chaos. Dee Dee and Zoey rode through the shuffling masses until they arrived at a row of neon-lit trailers surrounded by more pink tents. The entrance to the ramshackle but festival encampment was marked by a pair of weathered animatronic mannequins portraying women in stripper garb, half-heartedly undulating like even they couldn't work up the energy to fake enthusiasm. Dee Dee turned in, passing several very tired-looking sex workers who were wearing too little clothing for the chilly night. They sat on the ground and browsed their phones or dozed in lawn chairs. A few stood atop the trailers to get a better vantage point on the riot playing out within the festival grounds, most of them smoking cigarettes and seeming somewhat bored by it. Dee Dee parked and said, "Follow me," as if Zoey had some other option. "Give me a minute," said Zoey, who stopped and did her breathing, trying to calm nerves that were still humming from having almost been torn to pieces by a deranged riot hive mind. Zoey tapped her earpiece. "Are you guys there?" No answer. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard from the suits. Maybe the earpiece had gotten broken in the chaos, or maybe they were busy, or maybe everyone was dead. Zoey reached for her phone and then remembered that it had gotten stolen by some guy in the crowd, who was now either stomping it to pieces or sifting through every message she'd ever sent or received, scouring for any dirt that would be valuable to a tabloid. Zoey followed Dee Dee after properly reassuring herself that her legs worked. They got only mildly curious glances from the sex workers, and it seemed clear that Dee Dee was familiar to them. They passed the neon-lit trailers and were now walking among makeshift tents, presumably where the residents slept in between shifts. Everything stank of urine and wet trash. All along the ground were discarded ISO patches, purple and pink and red. Slap one on and it would dispense the drug into your bloodstream at perfect intervals to keep the euphoria humming for about 8 hours, until it was time for a new patch. Within 4 hours without one, you'd feel like you had the flu. 4 hours after that, your insides would spasm and twist until there was nothing left in your bowels. When you took on an ISO habit, Zoey had been told, it was like you'd had a major organ removed, and only those colorful patches could replace its function. Dee Dee said, "I see the disgust on your face. You know, Leo Damon got famous coming to places like this, getting the trash and human waste on camera, saying, 'See, look at these subhumans, living like animals, wallowing in filth, like anybody wants to live like this, like they're getting away with something.'" Zoey said, "You could get a dozen Ivy League lawyers, make them live out on a patch of land cut off from their money, get them hooked on opioid patches, and within a day it'd look just as bad. No trash pickup services, no running water, no sewer lines. Things turn messy fast." Dee Dee kicked one of the discarded patches with a shiny black boot. "The dealers are across the way, over in those trucks. The clients come, they pay. The sex workers go right over and buy the patches. The circle of life, as your friend Will likes to call it. What are we doing here? Do you think Violet escaped here?" "She's somewhere around here, hiding from us. So here's the question. How do you feel about the men who come to this camp? The tourists who see visiting the desert horrors as part of the exotic catharsis music and arts experience. Would you date a guy who did that? Around here, it's hard to find a guy who hasn't paid money for something. If not this, then a dancer in a club who'll throw in a little extra for the right tip. Same with the massage parlors. It's just the way it is. So how would you feel about a guy who rolled up here and, instead of pain and money, found a woman in a state of withdrawal and offered a path in exchange for a blowjob? No, that's different. Is it? A lot of the ones you see here are homeless. When they're done here, they'll just move to a different tent, or some scumbag sofa, or one of the abandoned buildings in the warehouse district. So how would you feel about a man who went there with a bag of fast food and offered to trade it for sex? Or on some cold night in February, he found a teenager on the sidewalk and said he'd offer them a night in his warm apartment if they let him do whatever he wanted. Now you're talking about coercion, people doing things because they don't have a choice. But if you pay them in money, and they in turn use that to buy food, or shelter, or drugs, then that's fine. Seems to me like you're using the money to hide the reality of what's going on. You know the name Tawny Morris? No. Died, right over there, last night. The selling point of those ISO patches was that you couldn't overdose. And maybe that was true, if that's all you were doing. But combine it with almost anything else, like some coke to try to offset the drowsiness, and it can stop your heart, just like that. Tawny died in a puddle of her own mess. No headlines, no outrage, no salacious video blasting from the skyline, no flock of amateur detectives trying to pin blame. Somebody in a city van came and scooped her up. She's probably piled up in an oversized morgue somewhere. But hey, at least somebody found her before the animals got to the body and chewed it up. That's terrible. That happens all the time. And it never becomes a city-wide obsession like your 3 white victims, because these were killed by the system, and the system doesn't have a scary mask. It doesn't send letters to taunt the cops, so who cares, right? This all sounds like something I could have heard in one of Leonidas Damon's speeches. Do you want to make sex work illegal? Crack down on the drugs? If some college girl wants to take her clothes off on camera for beer money, that's none of my business. If some failed actress earns $2,000 as an escort for oil sheiks and tech bros, laughing at their jokes for an hour at a restaurant before going up to do the deed, well, she's probably making more than she'd make in any other job she could get. But some of the ones you see here have been hustling since they were 10 years old. They've been hooked on synth opioid blends for almost as long, and they can't get any other jobs because nobody wants to hire a junkie. You and your people can sit in leather chairs and sip scotch and talk about supply and demand and the marketplace. But here's the part your man Will Blackwater won't tell you. The people you see out here will likely never be doctors or investors. They'll never be big earners or consumers. They have, according to the rules of the marketplace, negative value, which means their dying is the marketplace working as intended. So what would you do, if it was up to you? Unfortunately, I don't have the privilege of sitting around in a fancy rooms dreaming up what I want the whole world to look like. I have real people, flesh and blood individuals with names who have real, immediate, complicated problems, individual problems, different from one to the next, that'll take the rest of their lives to solve. They've been buried so many layers deep that you can't fix it just by writing a check or passing some new law. Though writing that check definitely wouldn't hurt. They arrived at a tent with the entrance closed, guarded by a striking young man in a spectacular wig. He had a long cigarette holder in his teeth, and, sitting at his feet, was a filthy, smiling golden retriever. Dee Dee said, "Hey, Shep, we know she's in there. We just need to talk." "Back off," replied Shep, "or I'm gonna sick my dog on you." The golden retriever panted, eyes wide, looking back and forth at the strangers to see who would pet him first. "Will Blackwater isn't here," said Dee Dee. "His scary-ass team isn't here, but they're gonna be. What we have now is Zoey. She's just a regular person, who came here straight from the trailer parks. Zoey, show him your teeth." Zoey pulled back her lips. "See," said Dee Dee, "got trailer park teeth. She just wants to know what's going on, and she'll buy everyone here a shiny new car if you tell her a sad enough story." Shep was unmoved, but the tent flap behind him was flung open from the inside, and Violet stepped out. "I'll talk to you," said Violet, "but away from here. If the suits show up, I don't want them disrupting business. Come on." Violet led them out of the camp, toward as private a spot as she could find. They arrived at a little rocky hill that wasn't ideal for pitching a tent or parking an RV, so they had it to themselves. It also gave them a nice view of the festival, which was now wall-to-wall chaos, lit by a smattering of bonfires and the towering beehive inferno in the center. "The other two missing women?" Zoey asked. "Iris and Rose. Are they okay? The message from Rose you just played, that's fake, right?" "They're physically safe, yes. Or at least they were, until I blew it." "Blew it? How? By getting caught, you mean? I don't intend to ruin whatever you're trying to do. I just want to understand it." "All three of us are in a program to get us out. We'll get new identities in another city." "And this required faking your deaths and freaking out the whole country." "If we stayed, what you're seeing in those videos and all that would be real." "So this is Leo Damon stuff. The whole thing about how sex work exposes women to violence. Is he paying for this?" Violet scoffed. "Leonidas Damon can go drink a sewer for all I care. This isn't about some abstract threat. We're going into protection because we're being targeted by a specific person." "Who?" "You know who." "Are you implying Rex threatened you?" "I'm not implying it. He spelled out in vivid detail what he would do to us. All three of us. He said he was going to give us jewelry to wear. It was made of thin wire, with this buckle thing that pulls the wire tight. He said he'd put them around our necks, and when he pushes the right button—" "It strangles you," said Zoey. "Or worse. I've seen one before." "He said maybe he'd also have to put them on our wrists and ankles, like bracelets, that we'd keep them on forever. Tamper with the wire, he said, and it automatically snaps closed, snipping off the hand or foot. The idea was that we'd walk around the rest of our lives never knowing, that at any moment, if the mood struck him, he could just clip off a limb, or strangle us, or lop off our heads." "Jesus Christ." Dee Dee said, "I told you." "So, someone sneaked the three of you to safety?" "Clarence did," replied Violet. "No one else would help us." "I'm sorry, who was Clarence? There are too many names in my life. I can't keep them straight." "Clarence Crockett? He was manager at Chalet for a while." Dee Dee said, "He's the one who got fired after the incident with Lyra." "Ah," thought Zoey, as things became just a little clearer. Kind of. This was the guy who'd refused to ban Rex, setting this whole nightmare in motion. The guy Zoey had, at one point, thought might be their mysterious psychopaths. "So, he helped you because he felt guilty about the Rex thing?" "And because he decided the entire industry is rotten," replied Violet. "And your company, specifically." "Okay, fine, but why not just have you disappear? Why make a big production out of it? Isn't that just drawing attention?" "It costs money to make someone disappear, if you don't want them to be spotted on Blink 5 minutes later. Clarence knew people who could make that happen, but in exchange, he wanted to do, well, this. He had a whole storyline planned out. We just wanted to get out of town. Clarence wanted to turn it into a show. He has aspirations in Hollywood, I think, or something. When he starts talking, it's hard to tell whether he's really enthusiastic or just coked to the gills." "Echo told me he moved away to become a porn star or something." "Producer, not star. He makes gore porn. That's why he knew how to do all the effects." Zoey almost asked what gore porn was, but figured she could just guess from the name. She tried to think her way through it. "So, I get why this guy hates our company, and had Rose basically blaming us in the last broadcast, but who was supposed to be the killer in the final reveal?" "There wasn't going to be a reveal. Clarence can explain it better than I can. He has a whole pitch. Something about how it's indicting the system, not one bad apple." "And that this all plays into the hands of the Nazi candidate for mayor. That doesn't bother any of you?" "As far as I can tell," said Violet as she watched some new object catch fire over at the festival grounds. "Politics is just a bunch of people yelling that if you don't do what they want, regardless of whether it's good for you, then that means a monster gets elected. So you have to do whatever they say just to avoid the monster? No. I'm over that. None of these people care about us. Zoey wanted to disagree, but struggled to think of how. Instead, she said, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this puts my people in a position where we either continue the lie in the name of keeping the three of you safe, a lie that makes us culpable because of this claim that we intentionally sold you into murder, or we expose the truth, which exonerates us but puts you three in danger. Do I have that right? Is that your people now? Said Violet, looking skyward. She was reacting to the sound of a helicopter. Yeah, let's hope so. The aircraft lowered itself into a hovering position above a clearing not far from the encampment. It fired out from below it a ring of red lights that planted themselves in the ground, forming little holograms that projected a spinning message. Warning, stay back, landing area, risk of injury or death, which scattered the spectators who'd gathered there. As the aircraft landed, Zoey said to Violet, if you don't feel like talking to them, you might want to get moving. What are you going to tell them? She asked, eyeing the helicopter warily. Nothing they don't already know or suspect. Violet disappeared among the tents, leaving Zoey alone with Dee Dee while they watched the helicopter rotors slow to a stop among the cloud of kicked-up dust. Wu arrived first from the helicopter contingent, holding out a phone for Zoey. Oh, she said. You ran out and got a replacement already? No, that is your phone. I retrieved it. You took it from the random guy in that crowd of 250,000 screaming weirdos? It's a long story. Zoey thought she detected something in his tone. Are you mad at me? Would you care if I was? Don't say that. I'm sorry. The moment got the best of me. I'll give you a bonus. Do you even know how much you pay me? No. Go to the accounts person and just reward yourself a bonus. However much you want. It's fine. No, it's not. You guys have probably been scrambling ever since I jumped off the stage, and now I feel terrible. You must feel like you're protecting a hyperactive child. Do you want a car? You can have one of the fancy cars in the garage. You've offered me one before, and no, it's fine. It's part of the job. Will arrived next and said, Zoey, if he wanted a boring client, he'd go find one. So, Violet is alive. I assume the other two are as well. She says so. I'll tell you on the ride back. It appears we have an impossible decision to make. Is my mom on the helicopter? Your mother left to go to an after-party in the city with the band Vampire Toilet. I know this because her only parting words were, tell Z I'm going into town with Vampire Toilet. You can decide for yourself how concerned you should be. But at least she's not out in the chaos. Echo arrived next, eyes fixated on said chaos. Andre was close behind her, his phone in his hand, browsing feeds from within the riot. Dee Dee gave Will a look. Your little festival has turned into a war zone. Funny how easily even somebody like you can lose control, isn't it? Will sipped his drink and said, It is. This all happened a full 22 minutes earlier than our model indicated. The Rose hoax acted as a catalyst. Are you really going to pretend this is all part of your grand design? Zoey said, Oh, you have no idea. Will nodded toward the madness. The beehive is coated in a flammable material, easy to light, makes a bright, beautiful flame. The coating burns off after a while, and the material that remains is absolutely fireproof. It can't be relit. The objects you see the rioters smacking each other with are panels and pieces of cladding pried from the amp towers, and bars taken from the crowd control barriers. It's all made of a rigid foam that creates a nice, satisfying bonk if you hit somebody with it. But if you swing it hard enough to cause injury, it'll shatter. At which point, said Dee Dee, the real thugs will just pull the knives out of their boots. There are no knives. Nobody gets through the gate without passing through a backscatter scan that will find any weapon or object that could plausibly be used as one. Anyone whose fists could be used for real damage, anyone with augmentations, we can detect, or military training, has been removed from the crowd, told they'd won a contest, and sent to a VIP area. There's a separate one for sex offenders. Drones are tracking every single attendee. If things get too serious in a spot, security converges and hits everyone with calming foam. So you wanted this to happen? You whip these people into a frenzy until they tear each other to pieces? No, they'll tear the venue to pieces. For a while. And then we'll put a stop to it. Dee Dee watched the bedlam for a moment, then asked, "And how will you do that?" Will took a sip of his drink. "Watch." Zoey rolled her eyes. "Dee Dee, you shouldn't just ask Will to explain things to you. He likes it too much." As they watched, the entire sky in front of them erupted in light. A formation of drones over the festival grounds had fired up floodlights that bathed the world in a harsh blue-white glare. Authoritative female voices blasted from the speakers, announcing that due to the rioters' irresponsible behavior, the festival was being shut down, and no other acts would be taking the stage. Then, around the perimeter of the festival grounds, came dots of flashing red and blue lights. The colors were intended to suggest police, even though they were attached to completely privately owned, tank-sized riot drones. 50 of them rolled into the festival grounds, spraying a stream of white fluid, an extremely cold, sticky concoction that sapped the strength from limbs, and, in general, made any kind of vigorous action difficult if not impossible. It also formed a muddy slime on shoe soles that was slicker than ice, allowing for the target to stand or shuffle away at a measured pace, but anything more would cause them to wind up flat on their ass. Zoey knew all of this because of a lengthy presentation she'd been forced to sit through months ago. This included a live demonstration of the calming foam conducted in the courtyard of the estate, after Zoey had implied to Andre, who'd been running the presentation, that she didn't see how it could work. "Oh, nice," said Dee Dee, as the unmanned vehicles hosed down the crowd. "You're rolling in with the anti-riot tanks we've watched put down protests in pretty much every dictatorship on Earth." "They look like that, yes," said Will. "People really hate those things. Andre, do you still have blink coverage of the riot up on your phone? It'll be hard to see what happens next from here." Andre let them gather around his phone so they could watch as the crowds that had been fighting each other instead swarmed the riot tanks. They were not easy to topple, but it could be done if enough strong backs were united in the effort. It required several lifting on one side while others pulled down from the top. It was something the rioters instinctively did because the tanks just looked top-heavy. It was the obvious strategy. It was almost as if these particular vehicles had been designed with that in mind, complete with an obnoxious loudspeaker demanding that the rioters stop what they were doing. The four of them watched as the first tank toppled over, hilariously spurting anti-riot juice into the air, belching sparks and smoke as if some crucial mechanism had been damaged inside. A cheer went up across the grounds, from both sides. Elsewhere, rioters copied the same technique on another tank, now with renewed confidence that it could be done. All were united in one purpose: to take down the forces that were there to ruin their fun. The rioters' beef was now with the venue, and the vendors, and the security, with the rich jerks who thought they could tell them what to do. The two antagonistic factions of the festival, East and West, had found a common enemy, just as Echo's model had said they would. "When it's over," said Will, "they'll have won. The riot drones will be trashed. The venue will be a disaster area, but the rioters will be wet, and cold, and hungry. Some will head into the city to find a place to clean up and sleep, or to keep the party going. Those who remain on the grounds will try to straighten up the aftermath to create somewhat clean and warm places where they can collapse for the night. Contrary to the announcement, the next acts will, in fact, take the stage, ostensibly in defiance of festival organizers. The folk act, Canterbury Males, will play in the west. Party rappers, Richest Bitches, will play in the east. Not a single violent verse between the two." "What's their hit song again?" asked Zoey. "Richest Bitches?" "I'm not familiar with any modern music. But you know their hit, because we talked about it." "I don't recall." "Say it." "We're getting off the subject." "The song," said Zoey, "is I farted my panties across the room again." Dee Dee said, "I feel like I've just listened to a monologue from the devil." "So if you climb far enough up the ladder, is it all like this? Are all conflicts just games arranged by the powerful?" "Boy, wouldn't that be nice," said Will, "to think somebody is in control. No, this is a contained, managed event, created with a tremendous amount of planning and resources." He nodded toward the chaos. People come from all over the world for this, year after year, and they never regret it. From behind them, Echo said, 0 deaths so far. 5 people knocked unconscious, but crews removed them from the chaos immediately. Zoey turned on her recovered phone, swiped to her messages, and found a string of unreads from Aviv, including several informing her that he was not, in fact, inside the energy drink robot, and then a whole bunch after that, apologizing. She just turned it off and stuffed it back in her pocket. Bud arrived last, pointing a thumb over his shoulder. Shep back there is saying you promised to buy cars for everybody? Sure, said Zoey. Why not? I'm totally spent, but we need to figure out what in the hell we're going to do with... A commotion went up around the entrance of the camp. Not running and screaming, but rather the kind of murmuring dread that comes with a surprise visit from an annoying house guest. And then Zoey felt her soul try to escape through her navel. The giant transparent luxury tour bus, known as the Fishbowl, was rolling up to the neon trailers of the sex workers' camp, blasting music. It was followed by an entourage of SUVs, and, overhead, a cloud of spectator drones. Zoey groaned. My God, how are people so good at arriving at the exact wrong time? Will took a drink from his flask. Zoey gave him a look, and he silently handed it to her. She downed quite a bit of what remained. All right, she said. Let's go over there. Ha ha! Shouted Rex at the sight of Zoey and her crew. You're alive! When you and Alonzo jumped into the crowd, whoa, that was tit chili supreme. Zoey didn't reply, and neither did anyone else. Some of Rex's crew were wheeling hand trucks of boxes out of the fishbowl and the entourage vehicles. A camera drone hovered in front of Rex's face, and he got into character. Hey, welcome to the members of the Rex Army who are tuning in. For the rest of you, we've been having a wild day here at Catharsis, but the energy turned a little too extreme for us, so we rolled on out of here. We came right up here, among some of the nomads, the hustlers out here keeping it real in tents and campers, on their business 24/7, making a buck to keep food on the table. My crew are rolling out free cases of coffee and donuts, and, of course, Rex-branded sweatshirts and heated blankets for chilly nights like these. These folks out here, the working girls and the working dudes, they're the real heart and soul of this city. He was edging closer to Zoey in the suits as he spoke. Zoey shot a glance toward Dee Dee, wondering if she would attack the man on camera. She saw only her back. Dee Dee was storming away, wanting no part of Rex's publicity shoot. Echo noticed and went off after her, probably to make sure Dee Dee wasn't going to come roaring back to run over Rex with her motorcycle. It just stinks that they have to spend tonight out here in these cold tents, Rex was saying. But what can you do? Oh, wait, there is something. What I have here are vouchers for a night in Libertine Suites, downtown. That's in the Livingston Towers complex. But let's be real, it's Zoey's tower now. Me and Zoey want to make sure these hustlers have a warm, clean place to sleep tonight. Or whenever they want it. You're gonna say that's all political, but me and my girl here... He put an arm around Zoey's shoulder. Our only political position is that it's the people who make this city work. Not politicians or clergy or anybody else there trying to tell others how to live their lives. We have to look out for each other. Nobody else is gonna do it. He paused, clearly waiting for Zoey to chime in. I agree that they should be protected at all costs, said Zoey. And they should be protected from every direction. From police, from violent customers. Exactly, said Rex. As for Rose, the lovely young woman who we saw in that terrifying live feed tonight, I'd ask all of you out there to send your most positive energy her way. If you have any knowledge about where she's being held or who is behind it, please contact the police. Or if you actually want something done, hit me up with a message. Now, let's get busy handing out the goods here. He went off to grab a stack of merch to hand out, followed by his swarm of viewer drones. Well, most of them, Several hung over Zoey, buzzing and pulsing, waiting to see if she would join in the charity effort. Bud came up behind her and in a grim voice said, "Miss Ash, we have an emergency meeting back at HQ to deal with this festival disaster. We need you there. We'll dispatch staff to finish up here." Zoey nodded and tried to act like she was only reluctantly allowing herself to be hustled away to the helicopter. As they were lifting off, Zoey said, "Had Rex been planning this? Trying to pin me down somewhere so he could get shots of the two of us arm in arm?" "I don't know," replied Will, "but it tells us one thing very clearly. Rex very much thinks you want him dead." "Well," sighed Zoey, "at least he knows how to read people." Chapter 22. It turned out that the reason the suits had gone out of contact with Zoey for a bit was because they were in the process of evacuating themselves, making a public show of escaping the chaos that had, at least from the rioters' point of view, grown out of their control. The key to keeping the ambitions of a mob contained is to provide the illusion that containment has been lost. This was all planned, but was part of what Zoey had missed by avoiding the security briefing 24 hours earlier. It had been established years ago that managing the riot portion of the Catharsis Festival had to be done off-site, for the same reason that it's hard to steer an ocean liner if you're tied to the propeller. The fenced-off artists' retreat, with all of its luxury trailers, would, according to Echo's models, be overrun by rioters about 20 to 30 minutes after order had totally broken down. The trailers were all designed to be destroyed, or at least taken over, the commoners rejoicing at ransacking the enclave of the elites. All bands and vendors were offered evacuation prior to that point, though some always chose to stay behind and join the riot. The suits had thus moved to the remote office, aka the nearest of their businesses with a meeting space, Andre's Barbecue Restaurant, Carnivore Tex, located in the trendy East Village neighborhood. It boasted 5 stories of dining with a whirling column of fire whooshing up through a glass tube in the center of each floor, the flames slow cooking meat in rotating racks in view of the diners. The ventilation was designed to spread the appetizing scent of roasting meat for 3 blocks in every direction. The restaurant had been closed to customers, but Andre insisted he knew how to make the best items on the menu himself. So at midnight, Zoey was watching riot cleanup on a series of monitoring tools while eating a fire cloud burger, a hamburger patty covered in the restaurant's custom chili sauce, topped with a raw chopped onion, melted butter, and marshmallow cream. Zoey had discovered a rule in tabula rasa, which was that if a menu item sounded like a disgusting prank, it was probably pretty good. Zoey had scrolled through all the messages from Aviv, 20 of them, finally ending with, "Aviv, please understand the whole thing happened because I decided you were right. I couldn't stay at the festival. I couldn't stay in TR. I had to get out of town, but I wanted to spend time with you at the festival, and I had another one of my bad ideas." She replied, "Stop messaging me. I have a 1-strike rule for guys who make me the butt of a joke in public." Then she put away her phone. "Leo Damon is about to give a speech," said Bud, "from the festival grounds." "In the middle of the night?" asked Zoey from around her burger. "Do tourists think the city's sleepless playground bit is fun? Because it's not. It takes years off your life." "He has to do the appearance now," said Andre, "while the grounds are still a mess. It'll be too clean in the morning. He can't let his followers know that there are ways to clean up the litter without exterminating the litterers. And there are even more viewers up and watching now than on a normal Sunday night/Monday morning," added Bud. "The roving packs of expelled refugee revelers who normally alight on the city's bars and strip clubs have all decided to drunkenly scour the city for rows. They're crawling over any facility that has shipping containers, trying to find one that contains a captive missing woman, generally making a mess wherever they go." "How long?" said Zoey. "Until they latch onto some random citizen and declare him to be the sex butcher and stone him to death in the street." "Our model says there's a 50% chance of that happening by sunrise," said Andre. Is that a joke? You'll never know. I keep thinking I'm gonna go to bed at some point. That's not gonna happen, is it? It sounds like we're in crisis mode until further notice. Can somebody show me where the coffee machine is? Andre gave Zoey a hard stare. This establishment has a very good coffee machine. It's a commercial bun model, the best they make. If anyone is to use it, it will be me. Sure, I'm good either way. No, you say that, but whenever I hand you a cup of coffee that you didn't make yourself, you take a sip and get this little disapproving look on your face. I do not. Bud said, You do. It's like, ew, these beans were growing at the wrong elevation and breathed on by a depressed donkey. Andre gave her a solemn expression. This has been a long day, and I will gladly crank up the bun, but you have to promise not to make a face when you drink it. Can't you just turn your back to me? No, I'll feel it in the room. It's a disapproving energy you put out. Bud said, It's true. You're just like your old man was with cigars. I'll do my best, she said, then looked around the room. Did we ever hear from Echo? Just the one cryptic message, replied Will, telling us to leave without her. Is she with Dee Dee? The message was so cryptic that I don't even know that. It only implied that she would be here at some point, and that we should be ready when she arrived. Ready for what? It didn't say. All right, said Bud. Now I know we all feel run out right now, but here's Leonidas Damon, who's about to make everything worse. Bud brought up the feed on the row of wall monitors that, on a normal day, would presumably be blasting a series of sporting events. Damon was speaking to a pack of reporters and a crowd of supporters somewhere on the east side of the festival grounds, surrounded by debris and the orange glow of smoldering trash fire aftermath. First of all, he began, I want to thank all the volunteers who have stayed behind to try to clean up this mess. I know it's dark, but you can see around me what condition this place has been left in. If you want to know my opponent's vision for this city, just take a look around. The party is great while it lasts, but in the end, you're just left with the carnage. Waiting just over there are bulldozers, ready to come in here and push all of this away, where it will be hauled off to the incinerators to provide heat to this city. Well, in this election, that's us. We're the bulldozers. A big cheer from the smattering of gathered fans. Zoey heard her phone chime, no doubt a reply text from Aviv, which she ignored. What is our city known for? Continued Damon. As a freak show of crime? Of women who are bought and sold like animals, butchered like animals? I can only imagine what the family of young Rose is going through, watching her ordeal turned into entertainment for social media. Because it's all part of the show, isn't it? Well, not on my watch. If you elect me, I will put 1,000 new police officers on the street. It's time to put an end to this bloodbath. More cheers. Further, I will close down the artificial meat plants until inspectors have an opportunity to examine every step of the production. Families should know what they are feeding their children, and I guarantee if any non-animal tissue is discovered, it will be DNA tested and cross-checked with our database of missing crime victims, so that we can get closure to some of these families. Wait, said Zoey, nearly dropping her burger. Did he just invent a new conspiracy theory? Andre, who was returning with a mug of coffee for Zoey and a huge chunk of peach cobbler for himself, said, Yeah, he's been testing that one today, combining the missing girls and the Soylent Black conspiracy into one nonsense stew. It's testing very well for him, added Will. His lead may be double digits at this point. With, 30 hours until the polls open? Said Zoey. How in the world are we going to submarine his popularity in one day? Will didn't reply, only drank. Speaking of which, continued Zoey, months ago I seem to remember you guaranteeing that his candidacy wouldn't go anywhere. You said you had dirt on all the probable candidates. We did, but Damon pulled a move that is genuinely hard to counter, from a PR perspective. He tells a story of growing up in a life of crime, addicted to drugs and sex, even hinting that he'd assaulted multiple women before seeing the light and achieving his current moral perfection. The big scandal is that he's lying. His past is as vanilla as they come. He is an utterly unremarkable man who has lived an unremarkable life. He's a newcomer to politics, so he has no record, no scandals. He just hasn't done anything really, good or bad. Echo said my problem is I'm a pie-in-the-sky idealist who always expects some neat way to solve problems. So is this one of those examples where I just have to accept that we're going to lose? Because it kind of seems like Leonidas Damon has us boxed in. Bud said, "Hey, if you're looking for a ray of hope, there's always the chance that there's a gap between what people will tell a pollster and how they'll actually vote. They may not like the sound of hearing themselves say they're voting for chaos and human meat in the burgers, but might vote that way on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, as of a few minutes ago." "The problem," said Will, "is that there are two very different factions in Damon's supporter base. There's the hardcore authoritarians, who want crime crushed at all costs, and actually like his vision. Then there's the normal people, who assume the hard rhetoric is just talk, but that he'll still be tough on crime, and generally make the streets safer for the innocent children. In other words, the second group assumes he simply isn't competent enough to be a tyrant, whether he wants to be one or not. So if you try to make him look incompetent, it actually helps with that second group. If you try to make him look a crazy wannabe dictator, it helps him with the first." Zoey felt her exhaustion turning into despair. "It kind of sounds like our problem is that this is a democracy, and more people want Damon to be mayor than Alonzo." "Maybe," replied Bud. "He's convinced them they're caught in a trap so that they'll chew off their own legs." "If you could fast-forward them into the future to see what kind of world Damon wants," said Andre, "they lose their enthusiasm fast." "So how far are we willing to go to stop him?" asked Zoey, "if nothing else works?" Will looked like he was about to answer, but was interrupted by a banging at the rear door, from the alley. They all went back there, and in from the door burst Echo Lean, who was as close to frantic as Zoey had ever seen her. "Quick," said Echo breathlessly. "Help us get him inside." Everyone in the room knew not to bog down the process with questions or demands for explanation. If someone on the team insisted they needed your immediate assistance, you assisted. Explanations could come later. Will, Zoey, and Bud followed her into the alley, where Dee Dee was waiting next to a hotel shuttle that they had presumably stolen and or hijacked. She opened the side door, and lying across the seat in the back was Rex, bound and gagged. Will took exactly 3 seconds to absorb what he was seeing, process how it changed their situation, and recover. He and Bud quickly dragged Rex inside and restrained him in a chair in the kitchen, which was the room farthest away from any windows. They left Bud to watch him. Then everyone else gathered in the dining room, out of earshot. Will said, "Andre, Wu, would you mind going out and making sure nobody followed them here?" This was a perfectly sensible idea, but Zoey silently noted that Will also had a tendency to get Wu out of the area whenever he suspected a crime was about to occur. Wu's job was to guarantee Zoey's safety, not to participate in any kind of criminal conspiracy. After the two left, Echo said, "Rex left the camp with a sex worker named Danza. Told his team he'd be back before sunrise. We have that long before his people and his fans notice he's late. Then some very brief amount of time after that before they start actively looking for him." "Okay," said Will, seeming to take a moment to calibrate his next words to not sound like criticism. "So, tell me why exactly he is here." "He was going to kill her," replied Dee Dee. "We tailed him when he left. He took Danza to a hotel room, the same joint he was giving out vouchers for, and puts this around her neck." She handed him a loop of thin, black wire, big enough to be slipped over a head. It was, of course, identical to what Lyra had shown Zoey at the noodle joint. "It looks like you all know what this is?" "It's a constrictor wire," said Will. "It can be controlled remotely. You activate it, and that buckle pulls it tight." "Pulls it tight. Yeah, that's one way to put it." The tiny little power plant in that buckle is tech Arthur brought into this world. The wire is some kind of space-age material. It's a nanofilament braid, and we didn't make this. It's something that got out into the black market. I also think it was extremely convenient that Rex chose to go after a new victim on tonight of all nights, right in front of you. It was a setup, so what? All Danza did was ask if he was interested. On your instruction. On her desire to see Rex taken down. So, after setting up your own sting operation without running it past anyone, you then kicked in the door of his hotel room with the intention of slapping Rex's head clean off his body. And I suppose Echo convinced you otherwise. I told her, said Echo, that we'd have no chance of disposing of the body if we did it there, that one way or another, it was to her advantage to get the rest of the team involved in a less public place. I told him I'd kill him unless he took that wire off Danza, said Dee Dee. He refused. We had to get it off ourselves, after Rex was subdued. We had to rig software that would bounce back its signal. See, it's set to check in once every second off Rex's vital signs, and could only be loosened based off a deactivation signal from him. In other words, it was set to go off if Rex were to be killed. Insurance against us, something he could hold over our heads if we threatened him. We had to spoof a signal to get it off her, or else just tampering with it would have triggered the mechanism, and Danza would be dead. Dee Dee said, So what more do you need? You've sent your message, replied Will. He knows we can get to him. We tell him to back off, that he's not to indulge this impulse any further. You, of all people, should know that a guy like this can't be reasoned with. Will closed his eyes and touched his forehead with his fingers, a show of exasperation that Zoey had never seen before, and that she didn't think was a performance. Just now, for the first time, she understood how utterly exhausted he was. Dee Dee, he began quietly, this is our only option. Do you want power? Do you want to effect change? Real change. This is what it looks like. It's the long game. You have to think bigger than the monster that's in front of you. Let's go back into the kitchen as a united front. Do you think I'm doing this out of mindless rage? I'm doing it on behalf of justice. So what happens if, in the name of justice, I go back there and slap his head clean off his body? You are a member of Alonzo's family. If you kill this guy, and that turns his fans against Alonzo, then Damon wins, and then who knows what happens after that. We'll have launched a ship that can be very hard to turn around. How do you know that losing the election would even stop him? Because it's the one reputation Damon can't have. Nothing else sticks to him. Call him a racist, a sexist, a fascist. Those words don't mean anything to his supporters, but the one thing he can't be is a loser. And he definitely can't be seen losing to someone like Alonzo. That's the one outcome that would smother his political career in the crib. So now we have to go back there and convince Rex to clean up his act and to keep boosting Alonzo for the next 2 days. He's not leaving this restaurant. Why? You can't wait 2 days to go after him? No, because after the election is over, you'll say I need to give it a bit of time so tensions can calm down. Then, once tensions calm down, if they ever do, you'll say, don't do it now, we just got people calm down again. Then after that, you'll say, you can't do it now, it's almost time for the next election. People like you have been putting off people like me for hundreds of years that way. It'll never be the right time. Zoey said, Echo, if you could magically program Rex into your threat assessment software, what would it say are the odds he kills a woman in the future, if he hasn't already? Before she could answer, Will said, What if we could do the same with Damon? See what happens to women like Violet and Iris and Rose once he's in power. Because we do have a model showing we can't win without Rex's help. Hell, at this point, it's a stretch that we can win with his help. Dee Dee leaned close to Will. If Rex had hurt someone you cared about, he'd already be dead. Do you want to know how I know that? And do you want to know how many times I've resisted the urge for payback in favor of playing the long game? Do you know how many of my people have died waiting for your people to play your long game? We can't let you do this, Dee Dee. You know we can't. Alonzo knows. Do you think we installed your implants without adding a failsafe to shut them down? Do you think I allowed you to install these implants without overriding your failsafe? Your unfailing assumption that you're smarter than everyone else is going to be what gets you killed someday. Maybe soon. They stared each other down. Zoey held her breath. Well, hold on now, said Bud, who had at some point silently emerged from the kitchen. Are you two so dug in that you can't see that you've already arrived at an agreement? Will asked for 2 days, or at least that's what I heard, after which Dee Dee can do whatever she wants. Further, Dee Dee just established that even if Will were to renege, he can't physically prevent her from acting. All he can do is shake his fist and call her mean names. So, there we go. Dee Dee holds off for at least 2 days, at which point no one can stop her from doing as she sees fit. Now, Dee Dee, I get that you don't trust Will here, but you trust Zoey, right? If you have a guarantee from her, would that be good enough? During that 2 days, said Dee Dee, Rex will be watched every second. Every second. And if he steps out of line, then nobody here will try to stop you. Are we all agreed? Zoey, Dee Dee, Will, Echo, and Bud piled into the kitchen and found Rex watching the door, looking amused. He was clearly already thinking about how he'd be able to squeeze literally years of content out of this incident. Feels good, doesn't it? Said Rex as they entered. Got me tied to a chair, helpless. Now you all get to loom over me and feel powerful. There's no high like it, the high of domination. You girls must especially be getting off on this, spending your whole life scared some guy is going to murder you if you set him off. Now my hands are tied, and you can say anything you want, do anything you want, and I can't strike back. He smirked. Or can I? Bud said, Can we untie your hands? Are you going to act like a fool? I'll be good. Echo cut him loose, and Rex rubbed his wrists. Say that 10 times fast. Will held up the constrictor wire. We'll make this quick. This has to stop. A chair had been set legs up on the counter next to Will. He looped the wire over one of the legs, as if intending to use it as a visual aid. We're not asking, said Will. The women are terrified of you, and this predilection of yours threatens everything if it gets out. The cops in the city can't be trusted to enforce an order of protection. But we are implementing our own, right now. Stay away from the sex workers in this city. Just stay away. Whatever need you're fulfilling by playing these games with them, work it out with your therapist. This is not a lot to ask, considering all we're asking you to do is nothing. Rex's gaze shifted from Will to Zoey to Dee Dee, working through something in his head. He grinned. The 3 women, the ones you accused me of abducting, they're alive, aren't they? We're still working that, replied Will. But they don't concern you one way or the other, not after tonight. Understood? Just go out there, keep doing your thing, and we won't have Leo goddamn Damon as our mayor when we wake up Wednesday. Can you do that? Can you control this? You accused me of abducting and murdering these women. If they're still alive, you owe me an apology. We never accused you of anything, said Bud. We inquired, the same as we've inquired with dozens of folks in an effort to find our missing employees. What matters now is what you do going forward. Then why have I been brought here and treated like an animal? Dee Dee said, That loop of wire we pulled off of Danza, do you think we don't know what that's for? It has many uses, but for you it has only one. Rex nodded, always just a hint of that smirk playing across his lips. I know that was Violet you people were trying to chase down at the festival. I'm thinking that not only are the 3 whores alive, but that you've been talking to them. I'm telling you, said Will. That line of inquiry is a dead end. If they're still around, you're not going to bother them. I never bother anyone who hasn't hurt me first. Who arranged their fake murders? And this thing with Rose? Is she just acting all that out in a studio somewhere? There are worried people looking all over for her. So we're in agreement, asked Echo. What happens if we're not? Then, interjected Bud, You will be creating tension and conflict on our side at exactly the time when we should be united against Leonidas Damon. You actively campaigned against him. If he takes office, you don't think he'll find some reason to come after you? We all want the same thing here. Unless you want to hurt women, which you've just said you don't want to do, on account of how much offense the mere accusation triggers in your heart. We say hands off. You say you have no urges otherwise. He held out his hands and smiled. So where's the disagreement? And when he says hands off, said Dee Dee, he means all women, everywhere on Earth. You need to change your ways. And if I don't do this to your satisfaction? Asked Rex. Then one day you will walk into a shadowy place and not come out of the other side. You guys heard her just threaten me, right? What am I supposed to think? You dragged me in here, practically kidnapping me, throwing these crazy accusations in my face, and we're supposed to be friends? We're not friends, said Zoey before she was able to stop herself. I think you're a narcissist and a sadist. I think you've intentionally put yourself into a position where you can hurt women and get away with it, and where it really seems like my father could solve all of his problems by making the right people disappear. I am apparently not allowed to do that. So this is what we're doing instead. We're giving you a second chance. And yet, all it takes is another woman with a grudge to falsely accuse me, and you'll send your attack dog after me. No trial, no due process. I would appreciate it if you stopped treating us like we're stupid. I've been dealing with men like you my whole life, long before I moved out here. I don't want to hear any more pleading, and I definitely don't want to hear you playing victim. And regardless, added Will, we're not relying on your better nature to come through. We are relying on you to make a rational decision that this vice of yours threatens to undo your life in many ways. We are also relying on you to recognize that if we are making rational decisions, then it is not in our interest to harm you. But I've already been harmed. Dragging me in here, accusing me in public, I've been traumatized. My reputation has been damaged. To prevent us from just talking in circles for the rest of the night, said Bud, why don't you just tell us what you want? You already know what we want, so what's your demands? I want an apology. Dee Dee scoffed and turned, leaving the room, presumably because it was either that or slap Rex's skull right off his body. Once again, echo followed. Zoey felt herself about to say something, and, this time, physically bit her tongue. Will, in the inflectionless tone that Zoey always found chilling, said, On behalf of myself and our entire organization, I apologize if you have found tonight's events upsetting. No, said Rex. Not from you. I want an apology from the 3 women for putting on this charade, for spreading slander about me. Will had to take a moment to gather himself. Quickly, Bud said, But they're not here, so we can't make any promises on their behalf, can we? I assure you, if we find them alive, and if they feel they have something to apologize for, we will do whatever we can to facilitate that. But this is the last day of the campaign. We have events planned from 5 in the morning until the final votes are counted. Some of us are going to be awake for more than 40 straight hours. If we cry, our tears will smell of dark roast. I know for a fact that you, Rex, will be just as busy registering last-minute voters, pushing your people to punch the right name on the ballot, trying to avert the very dark timeline in which Leonidas Damon gets a foothold in politics. Can we go our separate ways in peace and do that important work without this other situation getting in our way? We can, said Rex. Just know that I don't consider this resolved until the accusations are cleared up. A man's reputation is all he has. Well, now, there's where I do have to disagree. A man's character is all he has. If reputation is the only thing keeping a man in line, well, then all he has to do is build himself up a following that'll turn a blind eye to anything but an atrocity committed live in front of their eyes, and maybe even that. And as we prepare to depart from here in peace, you may have a lingering thought that it's your reputation that will save you, regardless of your actions. That maybe you've got enough fans and guards to keep someone like Dee Dee at bay. But you should be aware that I know the names of every single man and woman in your security detail, I know the names of their wives and husbands and girlfriends. I know which ones are loyal to you and which are in it for a paycheck. And what I don't know, I can find out. See, you heard Will's threat there about the metaphorical restraining order, and I can see in your eyes that it just makes you more excited. The thrill of defying him and knowing you got away with it. That's part of the fantasy, isn't it? But I am telling you, we see all. Whether you go to a hotel or an alley or in a cave in the Himalayas, we will know your intentions even before you do. Whatever you got away with when Arthur was in charge, things are different now. Maybe Arthur didn't care too much about the girls getting hurt as long as the money kept flowing. But Zoey is in charge now. And when these people get hurt, she's not happy. And when Zoey isn't happy, Will isn't happy. And when Will isn't happy, ain't nobody happy. Until things get put right. It seemed like maybe Rex was trying to formulate a comeback so he could have the satisfaction of the last word. And it seemed like Will was ready to respond to whatever Rex said by popping his head off his body like a champagne cork. Before anyone could speak, Wu re-entered the room, apparently having finished his lookout and or decided that the immediate potential for criminal conspiracy had passed. "All right," said Will. He turned to Wu. "Do we know where Dee Dee went?" "She and Echo are out on the sidewalk having cigarettes, trying to calm each other down." Will nodded. "All right, Bud, we need to transport Rex here back to the festival grounds, or the hotel, or wherever his transport bus happens to be. You and he will come up with a very reasonable cover story he can give his people, or anyone who may have seen him get abducted from the hotel." "Sounds easy enough." "That means it won't be. I'm going to go talk to Echo, see if she'll go with you." Will left the room. Bud directed Rex to stand and said, "My car's down the street. The door's behind you." Instead of moving in that direction, Rex stared down Zoey. "You know, it seems to me like I've been doing my part in rallying my people to Alonzo's cause. But the last time I checked, he's still running behind. Since it's you people who supposedly run this city, it kind of seems to me like you're the ones who are dropping the ball and trying to put the blame at my feet. If you have something planned that can turn this around, maybe you should let me in on it." Bud smiled. "It's funny. I've been thinking about that, and I've got an idea." Zoey never heard the noise that interrupted Bud's words. The blast wave traveled faster than the sound. Chapter 23. Zoey coughed herself awake, to find she was in total darkness. She was lying awkwardly, her face pressed into the floor, her legs twisted around, one arm pinned under her. The air was thick with destruction dust, ash, concrete, and plaster. She thought she could hear trickling water somewhere, but there were no other sounds, aside from the ringing of her ears. "Hello?" The word came out as a rasp. She coughed again. She tried to roll over. Something heavy was lying on top of her. Something metal or wood or plaster, or all three. Her whole body hurt. She tasted blood in her mouth. She blinked and tried to adjust her eyes to the darkness. Still saw nothing. Was she blind? Was she dead? "Is anyone here?" she said a little louder. "Hello?" What had happened? Where was she? What day was it? With time and dedicated effort, she was able to roll over onto her back. The floor under her was concrete. Lying on top of her was, it seemed, a hunk of ceiling and a light fixture. She could move it a little, but couldn't lift it off herself. She thought she might be able to scoot out from under it as if there seemed to be some room around her, but in the darkness, she wasn't sure where she would go, or if there weren't worse dangers waiting in the shadows. That's when she felt the panic start to creep in. "Hello?" she rasped as loudly as she could manage. No response. She had been in Andre's restaurant, in the kitchen, but others had been there with her, and now all was silent. Zoey was certain, in that moment, that everyone else was dead. She wanted to cry, but couldn't work up the energy or the moisture, so she just lay there for a moment, feeling around with her hands, seeing if her body was intact. It seemed to be. Her face was wet and sticky. She suspected she had a bloody nose or a bloody something. "Hello? Anybody?" No response. She couldn't think of anything else to say or do. She sucked in as much air as she could and screamed as loud as she was able. "Help! Somebody! I'm stuck in here!" The last word trailed off into a coughing fit. She tried to think. Who knew she was here? Anyone? What had even happened? Some kind of attack? An earthquake? Did they have those in Utah? Was the whole building wrecked? The whole city? Had there been a nuclear war? How long ago did it happen? 5 minutes? 5 hours? 5 days? She felt her breath getting short and remembered the woman trapped in the glass box. Wait. She heard something. A voice? She said, "Hello?" She heard rustling, metal scraping, and then, "Zoey?" She couldn't recognize the voice. The word was slurred, mumbled. "Yes, I'm here. Who is that?" "Woo." He sounded close. "Are you okay? What happened?" "I am..." He seemed to be checking something. "I am not bleeding. Not externally, anyway." There was some hissing and spitting as he tried to form the words, and Zoey thought about Lyra, trying to talk through mangled lips. "Sorry, I am missing some teeth. Are you bleeding?" A little. I don't think it's bad. I can't see anything. Can you?" "No. Feel your clothes and floor for blood." She did. "It seems all dry. Got some blood on my face, but that's not a new feeling for me." "Can you move? I'm pinned to the floor. There is something on my legs. I think a refrigerator." "There's some ceiling lying over me, but it's not super heavy. I mean, it's not light either, but I can scoot out from under it if I have a reason to. I'm able to move all of my limbs." "Do you have your phone?" She couldn't believe that question hadn't occurred to her before now. She searched her pockets and the floor nearby. "No, I think I had it in my hand when whatever happened, so it probably went flying." "Hold on." She faintly heard rustling again. Then her field of vision became about 10% brighter. She looked to her left and saw light behind a narrow gap, between fallen appliances and hunks of plaster. "Ooh," she said. "I can see you, sort of. You're only maybe 7 or 8 feet away. Can you call someone?" "I'm not using the light on my phone. This is a flashlight I keep on my belt. My phone is smashed. It was in my pocket." "Do you know what happened?" "Let us see if we can figure it out together. I hear no sounds from the street, which tells me there are many layers of solid material between us and the outside. The refrigerator that is currently crushing my left leg was on the opposite side of the room prior to the event, at least 20 feet away, which means there was an explosion capable of propelling it that far that originated from the other side of it, which means the alley out back. So that tells me there was a detonation from the alley, perhaps from a car. Either the entire building collapsed on us, or it has partially collapsed, and the rest is teetering above us, ready to fall the rest of the way at any moment." Zoey absorbed all of this, and again tried to smother her panic before it could take hold. "All right," she said. "Do you have any idea of what happened to everyone else? Who else was in the room with us?" Rex, Bud. I believe Will had left the room. Some had gone outside." "Do you see any sign of anyone else?" I see there are human remains nearby, but it is impossible to say whose. It is more than one person." Zoey stopped breathing. "Woo, nobody else responded when I yelled out other than you. Is it possible that we're the only ones?" "There is no use in speculating," he said after a suspicious pause. "All we can do is assess our situation. We have breathable air,
Neither of us have wounds that need immediate treatment, or at least that can be treated with what we have on hand. We know that emergency crews will be here soon, but do not know how quickly they can evacuate us from the rubble, and we have no way of knowing if or when the space we are occupying will become unstable. If the building has collapsed above us, and considering I'm looking at the remains of load-bearing walls, I assume it either has or is about to. That means that you and I are probably in a spot where two fallen walls have formed a triangle, like a tent, creating this pocket of space. But there are millions of pounds of brick and cement above us, and if things shift, those walls would go flat on top of us.
Well, now, hold on. If they come to dig us out with bulldozers or whatever, couldn't that accidentally cause the same thing to happen?
Yes, I have been on the scene for multiple building collapses, and while it is not unheard of to retrieve survivors from the wreckage, the odds are not in their favor. The rescue efforts must be done in a very slow and deliberate fashion, specifically for that reason. It can take days. I heard a story of a man in Haiti who survived for 2 weeks after an earthquake collapsed his building. But generally, the rules of survival are very clear. If you can get out, do it. Find a window, find a gap, find something. Then, once you're out of the building, get as far away from it as you can.
Okay, well, you've got a flashlight, so tell me where we're going. Another suspicious pause.
Zoey, my left femur is pulverized. My right foot is facing the wrong way. Even if I were to get out, I likely would never walk again. Look my direction. You see the light?
Yes?
Keep looking.
The light shifted around, then streaked across the concrete floor. Wu had slid the flashlight toward her. Zoey had to scoot that way to get in grabbing distance. The light was a tiny little thing, like you'd put on a keychain. She said,
Got it. You'll want to move the opposite direction from me, out of the kitchen, away from the source of the blast.
Wait, why? Wouldn't the bomb have made a giant hole in the building?
The bomb would have created a pile of rubble, but I am more concerned about a secondary device.
Why would there be a second one?
It is very common. The first bomb is intended to draw a crowd of first responders and bystanders. Then the second bomb takes them all out after they arrive.
Jesus, that's evil.
The farthest from the blast is also where you are most likely to find intact building, including clear doors and windows. That is your best chance. Move that direction. First look for the door to the dining area. Then keep going straight until you can feel cool air from the outside or hear street noises. Find a way to mark the floor or leave a trail of something if you fear getting turned around.
And what happens to you?
My body will go into shock soon. If you can get out and speak to rescue crews when they arrive, perhaps you can direct them to me.
And in the meantime, the building could collapse on you, or another bomb could go off, like you said.
Just hours ago, I heard you have a discussion about how sometimes there are no perfect solutions. My job is to protect you. I was not able to prevent this attack, but I remained alive and conscious long enough to give you these instructions, and that will have to do.
Oh, so you think you're going to die?
That is simply the reality of the situation. You don't work in this field without the explicit understanding that this is how you may go. I took on one of the most dangerous assignments in the country, replacing a friend who died in the line of duty. If you make it out, tell Mel that my final act was to try to get you to safety.
Okay.
That's my wife.
I know that. I'm not leaving you to lie there alone in total darkness, waiting to get crushed like a bug under 1,000,000,000 tons of bricks.
Then we both probably die, and you will turn my final act into a failure. Go, now. The longer you wait, the more you put us both at risk.
Zoey was crying now, silently, trying not to make a big production of it. She took a deep breath and said,
Okay. Go.
Okay.
Goodbye, Zoey. Working for you has been interesting.
She took a breath, steadied herself, dried her eyes, made her decision. All right, I'm going. She clicked the flashlight, shining it around to get a sense of her surroundings. Then she crawled out from under the hunk of ceiling that had been resting on top of her. It was slow going, propelling herself with her elbows, her body not exactly the ideal shape for sliding along on her belly. She put the flashlight in her mouth to try to keep some kind of clear view of what was ahead. As she crawled, she felt new pains awakening in her body. It felt like she'd sprained or maybe even broken her ankle. Her ears were still ringing from the blast. Her sinuses were burning. Her eyes were burning. She felt pain in her scalp, and then remembered, almost with amusement, that this was the pre-existing wound from the butterfly witch attack. She crawled until she reached a dead end, a gap between fallen debris and appliances barely large enough to fit her hand into. She investigated with the light and made a left turn, curled around a fallen hunk of countertop, then encountered a human arm. She reached out and shook it.
You awake?
Wu startled.
Zoey, you went the wrong direction. Your better chance is...
Shut up, I'm not leaving you. Wu's face was an unrecognizable mess of swelling and blood. It looked like he had been thrown and caught the landing impact face first.
Zoey.
Shut up. Look, I know how men let their emotions get away from them in situations like this, but in your hysterics, you have wound up with this crazy idea that my life is more valuable than yours, when you have 2 children waiting for you at home.
I have 3 children.
3? And your plan was to sacrifice yourself because, what, I employ you to do that? Good God, what has capitalism done to our brains?
Zoey, look at my leg.
Yeah, it's squished. You have like 1,000 pounds of restaurant refrigerator on it, full of who knows how much additional weight in coleslaw and potato salad and cobbler. Life is full of these little problems we have to overcome, but don't give me that nonsense about how you'll never walk again, considering that my company owns technology that can give you super legs that will allow you to kick an entire moose across a golf course. Zoey scooted around so that she was lying next to him. She reached down and found his hand. She squeezed it. He squeezed back. She said, "Are you scared?" The longest, most suspicious pause yet.
Yes.
So am I. And now I can sense a new fear entering your brain, that you might have to spend your final hours with the most annoying woman you have ever met. Incredibly, he laughed. Weakly, but enough to send himself into a coughing fit.
I do not think of you that way.
Yes, you do. I can hear it in your laugh. And so they lay there, in the dark, waiting. Zoey glanced around with the flashlight to see if there was anything useful nearby, and happened to notice a length of thin, black wire, the constrictor device Dee Dee had taken off Rex's would-be victim. It was no longer in a loop, having pulled itself all the way through the buckle. It sat in a pool of splinters next to the hunk of chair leg it had severed, the wood looking like it had been hacked off in one swing by a strong man with a very sharp axe. At some point, Zoey fell asleep, or passed out. All she knew was that she felt like some amount of time had passed, and her body felt different. Some new aches, some new numbness. And she was now incredibly thirsty. She had the same ringing in her ears. Wu's hand had gone limp in hers. She squeezed his fingers. "Hey, you still there?" No response. How much time had passed? Why hadn't anyone come? If she had decided to leave Wu, could she have come back with help by now? Should she go ahead and go? Should she check if he is... She became aware of a noise that, in retrospect, was probably what had woken her up. The sound of rocks bouncing off other rocks. It was growing in volume and frequency. From above them, all around them. The rubble was shifting. Zoey held her breath. She felt like she should be doing something, finding a table to crawl under, anything other than just lying still and waiting to be flattened. She clicked the flashlight. Nothing happened. She stupidly clicked the button over and over, shaking it, slapping it. The rumbling petered out into silence. Zoey tried to shake Wu awake again. No response. She kept trying. Nothing. She cried, forced herself to cut it short. What now? If Wu was... gone, she should leave? Was it already too late? She had no light now, and no idea if there even was a clear path to crawl in any direction. She was so thirsty. She had a headache, and somehow it was the ringing in her ears that was killing her, making her whole body vibrate as if it was coming up from the floor. She was assaulted by a new hellish noise. Bricks fell and shattered, sounding like an army was riddling the rickety structure with bullets and grenades. There were pops and cracks and rolls of thunder. Zoey realized that she was screaming, pushing herself up against Wu for comfort, but he was not moving, and somehow that ringing in her ears persisted through it all, growing under the chaos, over the chaos, until the grinding shriek took over the world. And then light pierced the darkness, blinding her, and the wreckage to her left was pulsing and swirling and flying, like everything was getting flushed down a giant toilet. Concrete dust choked the air. Debris sprayed her face like buckshot. Out of the swirling chaos came a single headlight in the center of a mass of whirling blades. Aviv's ridiculous basement drilling machine rolled to a stop about 2 feet from her legs. The front end clicked open, and she expected Aviv to poke his stupid face out. Instead, it swung wide to reveal the interior of the machine was empty, aside from a cell phone and a shoebox-sized case covered in warning stickers. A voice from the phone said, "Zoey?" She crawled over and grabbed the phone. "Who is this?" "It's Echo." "Oh my God, who else made it out?" "Zoey, digging in has destabilized the structure. Our model is saying this space could go flat at any moment. The scan showed Wu was pinned under something. Is that right?" "Yes." Is he in a condition to move if you can lift the object?" "I don't know, Echo. I don't know." She was crying again. "But I want to get him out. I don't want him to get pulverized. I want to get him out in a condition where his family can see him." "Grab that box," replied Echo, knowing better than to argue. "There are instructions on the lid." More bricks rumbled overhead. "Hurry." Zoey took the phone and the box, then swung the drill door closed so she could see by its headlight. She crawled back toward Wu and popped open the box, which contained a rolled bundle of red canvas and a small black device with vents on it. A crude diagram instructed her to unspool the canvas and slide it under the object she wanted to lift. There were a bunch of warnings she didn't have time to read. She pushed the strip of red canvas under the fallen refrigerator and hit the one button on the attached device, unsure of what was supposed to happen next. The device whirred to life, producing a shrill whine that was possibly louder than the drill had been. It was an air pump. The canvas inflated and kept inflating, filling the space under the fallen appliance. It seemed extremely stupid and pointless. You weren't going to lift several 100 pounds of steel and potato salad with a freaking balloon. But then the appliance shifted, and yeah, apparently if you can move enough air hard enough, you can lift anything. There was suddenly an inch of clearance above Wu's messed up leg, and Zoey was elated, before she realized she had not even a vague idea of how to accomplish step 2. She needed to drag Wu out and into the boring machine, but he was probably 170 pounds of dead weight, and she barely had room to stand up. Debris rumbled overhead. Somewhere, something hard and heavy landed on something equally hard and heavy. Everything shook in the aftermath. The phone, which she left on the floor somewhere behind her, was urging her to get out. Zoey awkwardly tried to crouch and grab Wu under his armpits. She pulled backward with all her weight. There was an abrupt gasp and a terrible scream. Wu's eyes flew open.
What is happening?
He blinked, disoriented, clearly no idea where he was. We have to move. I got the fridge off you. There's an escape vehicle right over there, but I can't lift you. Wu did not ask any questions. He started pushing himself back with his hands, scooting along the floor at an excruciating pace. Something overhead exploded. Zoey tried to help propel the man along the floor as he scooted backward on his butt, pulling his ruined left leg out from under the refrigerator. He then rolled over and crawled on his elbows, his right foot twisted at a disgusting angle. The two of them moved along like a couple of dying caterpillars until Wu was able to pull himself into the drill, dragging his battered legs behind him. Every step of the way, the cell phone on the floor was yelling at them in Echo's voice to move faster, that the structure was coming down, as if this was somehow more apparent from Echo's vantage point than it was from theirs. It sounded like the very columns that kept the heavens aloft were collapsing. Zoey, totally oblivious to Wu's howls of pain, had to shove his legs in the last bit to clear the hatch. Wu pushed himself to the side as well as he could and said, "Come on!" It had actually not occurred to Zoey until that moment that she also needed to cram herself in there. It didn't look like there was half as much room as needed for that, but he was right. There wasn't going to be time for a second trip. She crawled in, and it was like she was being born in reverse, pushing herself into a narrow canal that had Wu on one side and the thin padding of the cramped drill machine's interior on the other side. She wormed her way in, realizing only after she was mostly inside she should have gone feet first so she could close the hatch. But just as the hatch had opened on its own, it now closed on its own, pushing her feet the rest of the way in. Zoey was pressed up against Wu so tightly that she couldn't expand her chest to breathe. A series of electronic voices spoke, but she could not hear them, as it now sounded like they were inside an avalanche. The machine vibrated, and the motors whined, and Zoey wondered if it would have to turn around to drill them out. But, of course, it was made to go both directions. The spinning array of bits on the other end went to work. The interior was soundproofed as well as could probably be expected, but the combined cacophony of the falling building and the grinding drill was still deafening. Worse, the trip seemed to be taking an eternity. Had they gotten stuck? Had the mechanism failed? Had the entire building now fallen on them, creating a mountain of concrete that would take weeks for the machine to grind through, if its batteries even had that much charge? Zoey couldn't breathe. Her chest was too restricted, and it felt like there was simply no air inside the sealed tube. Then, after an interminable amount of time, the noises faded, and the engines wound down. She heard voices, and the Aviv drill was opened, this time at the head end. Hands were helping pull her free, and she tried to look around, to count everyone, to see if everybody had made it out. She knew almost immediately that not everyone had. Chapter 24. By the way, on a side note, things are getting pretty emotional here, so I've had to, if things sound different, I've had to, take pauses and little, moments to kind of right myself, as it were, but just a heads up. Zoey emerged to find herself inside a fancy liquor store, surrounded by bottles of expensive whiskey stacked on spiral oak shelves 3 stories tall. She was disoriented by that until she figured out that they had drilled their way across the alley and well into the building next door. Echo ran up, looking haggard and exhausted, which to Zoey was like seeing the Statue of Liberty on fire. She handed Zoey a bottle of water. Zoey gasped, "Where's Will? Who all—" No one was listening. Paramedics had swarmed in, and Wu was immediately loaded onto a gurney and hustled away to an ambulance waiting outside. Across the room was Aviv, holding a tablet full of holographic menus. He was pale and sweaty, looking like he had just delivered a baby in the back of a taxi. Dee Dee was crouched on the floor nearby. At her feet was a glowing hologram of what looked like a pile of trash. It was a scan of the rubble next door, a red blob indicating the space where Zoey and Wu had been located. "Hey," Zoey said to anyone who would listen. "Where's Will? Did he—" Echo was now talking to a guy in a high-vis vest who was telling her all about building integrity, how the liquor store wasn't safe if the rest of the other building collapsed that direction. Another ambulance had pulled up at some point, presumably for Zoey. She had no intention of going to the hospital, and it joined a whole lot of flashing lights already on the scene. Those were Tabula Rasa PD, as apparently blowing up a whole building was enough to get attention from their thinly stretched staff. "Hey," she said. "Echo, hey, where's Will?" Echo finally pulled herself away, put her hands on Zoe's shoulders. "Do you need to go to the—" "No." Her ankle was killing her, but that meant nothing right now. "Are you sure? You shouldn't even be standing. Where's—" Zoe trailed off as she scanned the room. She saw Andre walk by outside on his phone. Echo said, "Hey," and moved to make sure she was making eye contact with her. "You should sit down. You're unsteady, I can see it. Let me find you a chair." "Who didn't make it?" Echo didn't answer for a moment. Tears were welling in her eyes. "Echo, who didn't make it out?" In a trembling voice, she said.
Bud didn't make it.
Zoe just stared. "But—" She turned back toward the stupid miniature tunneling machine and the wall they just drilled through. "If we survived, maybe he—"
No, he was...
She took a breath.
He was standing right on the other side of the wall from the blast. We never knew what happened. He wouldn't even have heard it."
Zoe found herself sitting on the floor, having never consciously made the decision to sit. "That's... Are you sure?"
They've found a lot of them.
Echo gestured toward Dee Dee and her hologram. Dee Dee swiped some controls, and another patch of red appeared, only this one was fragmented. Scattered. Dee Dee muttered, "Doppler scan. It's how we found you." Echo sat down next to Zoe, and only then did Zoe realize Echo had been crying. A lot. Zoe had never seen her do it before. From across the room, Dee Dee said, "Rex 2. The explosion or debris, it tore him in half." She swiped again. 2 red splotches appeared. Zoe realized what she was hearing in Dee Dee's voice wasn't sadness about Rex's passing, but disappointment. Aviv was still standing over by the wall with his control pad, looking as uncomfortable as a man can look. Zoe could only shake her head. "It's a miracle that Wu and I got out." "No," Dee Dee replied. "You were just standing in the right spot." "Has anyone talked to my mom? Does she know what happened?" Not yet," said Echo. "Will didn't want to bother her until he knew your condition, one way or the other." "What happened? Do we even know? Was this some kind of attack from Damon's people?" Echo got a look on her face that Zoe couldn't quite identify. She clenched her jaw, shot a look to outside, to the paramedics. It's like she was annoyed or embarrassed or otherwise about to say words she didn't want to feel passing over her mouth. Dee Dee answered for her. It was Harmonia. The word meant nothing to Zoe. For a moment she thought it was an unfamiliar adjective. "The woman with the butterflies," clarified Echo. "At the meat factory? She either overloaded her implants or got hold of a device, but it was on purpose. She left behind a video that she'd set to go up after the deed was done. She'd been hiding on the roof, who knows how long, and when the time came, she dropped down into the alley and detonated herself, like a bomb from a plane. That's why Wu and Andre hadn't spotted her when they went out." Zoe heard all those words, but processed none of them. "So," said Zoe, feeling like she was trying to take a quiz while someone was punching her in the gut. "She somehow found out we were here and came to blow us up? Or did Damon send her?" "No, she, well, according to her broadcast manifesto, she didn't know anybody was here. She thought she was blowing up the walk-in freezer where the human meat was stored," finished Zoe. "Jesus Christ, I'm gonna have a stroke. Where's Will?" "Outside, fending off the police. Listen, the world doesn't know what happened here. I mean, that there was an explosion is already news. Who was inside it when it happened and why is not." "What about Rex? Nobody knows he was in there, do they?" "No, but we have only hours until they figure it out. Maybe less. Are you sure you don't want to go to the hospital? Logically, I shouldn't even be asking you, but I know better than to try to force it. No, and if you want to do something for me, make sure nobody else asks me that. Zoey pulled off her shoe and sock to examine the bad ankle. It was purple with bruising, but she had full range of movement, so probably not broken. Echo wiped her eyes, sighed, and said, "This doesn't seem real. There are people literally all over the world who knew Bud. In Shanghai, and Moscow, and Australia, friends who'll be devastated by this, who still don't know. So many that we don't even know who they all are, who to contact. Probably some on every continent. There are mob bosses and senators and actual royalty who will cry when they get this news. People who won't be at his funeral because they can't admit they knew him. People who owed him but will never be able to pay him back. My God, this is, I think, the worst night of my life." Andre entered, looked shocked, and said, "Nobody told me Zoey was out? I was on the phone. How come nobody came to get me?" He kneeled down and hugged her. "Why have they got you on the floor?" he asked. "Nobody could find Zoey a chair? She has to sit on the dirty floor?" "How are you holding up?" asked Zoey. "I've been notifying Bud's loved ones as best I can. I just got off the phone with one of his partners. And I can already see the question on your face. But basically, Bud was in a relationship with several women at once. Or at least the ones I know about were all women. And it's difficult to discern from the outside which partners knew about each other. A few lived in the same house, but not all. It's made for a somewhat delicate notification process." "But how are you holding up?" "I don't know, man. Grief is funny in a situation like this. When it's sudden, I mean, out of the blue. At first, it's just shock, like an ambush. But once that's passed, you realize the ambush isn't really over. The grief hides and waits, ready to jump out at the most random times. For years and years. I guess it's just that, of all the ways to go, they have no idea it was coming." Zoey shook her head. "This doesn't seem right. Everybody who didn't know they talked to him for the last time. No chance to say goodbye. Bud was one of those types who'd come to the party, then at some point would just vanish, probably to go to another party. The man lived with his pedal to the floor, slept 3 hours a night. If you'd asked him how he wanted to go, not that any of us are going to get to choose, probably, but if you asked him, I think he'd choose something quick and painless that makes headlines all around the world. A spectacular crime, the details of which remain mysterious. Yeah, this is what he'd have wanted. If immortality wasn't on the table." Echo said to her, "I think Aviv has been waiting to talk to you this whole time, but he's scared that if he comes over here, you'll have him killed on the spot." Zoey sighed. "Send him over, I guess." Echo got up and made a quick hand gesture to Aviv, which he apparently took as a signal that it was safe to approach. Andre and Echo gave them their space. Aviv shuffled over, and, standing over Zoey like a skyscraper, muttered, "Hey there. How you doing? So you didn't really leave town. So that also was a lie. And it was a good thing I didn't. Will tracked me down. God only knows how. He says, meet me at the estate, we're packing up your drill. Believe it or not, we lost another hour charging the battery. And even then, we couldn't charge it all the way. It was down to 3% when you came blasting through the wall there." Zoey shook her head. "I have such a stupid life. So, I know nobody cares about this now, but it matters to me. So, there was no way I could stay at the concert with the bounty out there. But I really did want to be with you, in a crowd, like normal people. I had this fantasy of just hanging out. It didn't work, and I'll say it right now. My team told me it was a bad idea. The thing with the drink robot. Particularly Sig. She said it was the worst idea she's ever heard, and that you'd never speak to me again. I thought you'd find it charming, but I guess other women have an eye for this kind of thing. I can't imagine dating somebody else who has a team. It frees up so much time." 4 police officers entered the room. Aviv glanced their direction. "So, I'm about to be arrested. There was no way for me to get here with the drill without showing up on all sorts of cameras. There's a whole network of observers who just monitor which vehicles come and go from your estate. Did you know that? Anyway, your team convinced them to hold off until we completed the rescue. That's what Will's been doing out there." "Arrested for The pirate ship incident? Tell me you haven't already forgotten about that. It just feels like so long ago. And I don't know if you're new in town or what, but if you don't want to be arrested, tell Will and you won't be. Aviv gave her a tired grin. Zoey, think about who you're talking to. If I don't want their little jail cell downtown to hold me, do you really think it can? Nar. When something like this happens, you just incorporate it into the narrative. Based on what you just said, I have a feeling you and Will could be best friends. If you don't want me to contact you after I've served my time, I'll respect that. I'm no stalker. I'm just not very good at all this. But I'm sure you're in no mood to think about it right now. Well, you've got that right. If you go away for 20 years, maybe by then I'll be in the mood. The cops arrested Aviv in the polite manner in which wealthy celebrities are taken into custody. He was hustled out, and Zoey felt like she should be feeling something about it. But at this point, that was like asking for a melody from a smashed guitar. And now here was Will, striding in from outside. He somehow did not have a drink in his hand, even though he was surrounded by 10,000 bottles of the stuff. He was instead holding a blue blanket that he had apparently borrowed/stolen from the paramedics. Zoey got to her feet, rather than make Will force her, and tried to ready herself for whatever plan he'd come up with while she was holding everything up by selfishly getting buried in a building collapse. She said, I suppose it's time for another emergency meeting. Instead of answering, he draped the blanket over Zoey like a cape, pulling it over her shoulders. Then he reached around, like he was adjusting the blanket or something back there, and he kept doing it, reaching farther around her back. And Zoey finally realized that Will was hugging her. She got her arms free and hugged him back, and he squeezed her so hard that it kind of hurt her ribs. But she didn't say anything, and they stayed like that for a while. After he let her go, he swallowed and said, You should be in the hospital. Zoey didn't even acknowledge this. Echo told me what happened. After everything, of all the enemies you've taken on, Bud is gone forever because this mentally ill woman blew him up by accident? No. Will stabbed a finger at her. No, don't think that. Don't ever think that. Damon's people leaked this narrative. They fed it. They made it trend. He and his backers are who fed Harmonia's neurosis and paid for her implants. I said it before. They have a whole dark money fund to sow chaos just like this. They didn't even care what happened. It was like throwing a grenade into a crowd. No, Zoey. Bud died to the most powerful weapon in the known universe. A compelling lie. Don't ever underestimate it. That is the dragon that sits atop the mountain, the one that threatens to burn the world. I want to go to bed. A pause from Will. Then, You can if you want to. But you're not. No. There's work to do. I don't care about all that. The election. I don't care about any of it. I just want to go hug my mom and my cats. I want to soak in a tub until my entire body doesn't hurt anymore. I want to go to sleep, and when I get up, I want to go to the hospital and sit outside Woo's room, where I can be there with him without being close enough to bother him. Will didn't reply. I mean, I just got pulled from under a building. My ankle is killing me, and I probably have injuries I don't even know about yet because my nervous system is too traumatized to tell me about them. Will still didn't reply. There is no reasonable person on Earth who would ask me to keep going, she continued. No boss, no platoon leader. If they pull a soldier out from under a building, they don't send him back to the front lines. They fly him out. Still, nothing from Will. He just looked at her. No expression to indicate he was prodding her one way or the other. But we don't have much time, do we? Quietly, Will replied. No, we don't. To do what, though? What can we even do? We are going to sit down somewhere safe, clear our heads, and think through our options. Then let's go, before the crowd shows up. Will said, We can't go yet. There's press out there. We need to go out and make a statement. The street streamers were leaking rumors of your death the whole time you were under there. We need to correct the record. Or, correct it to our version of the truth. Zoey felt dread flowing in. And by we, you mean you and I. You're our most sympathetic face. The statement will be simple. We lost our close associate, Bud Billingsley, and almost lost you and your personal security to a terrorist bombing by a pro-Damon supporter, and that nobody else was in the building. He looked to Dee Dee. No one can know Rex was here. Agreed? What exactly do you have in mind? Asked Dee Dee, in a tone that suggested she was very frightened of the answer. He shook his head. Only the broadest of strokes. He thought for a moment, then said to Zoey, and then say that the police will be able to thoroughly investigate the scene after we've had a chance to recover Bud's remains. Andre shook his head. Man, Bud would not want anyone risking their safety just to gather up his parts for cremation. I know, said Will, but we are going to tell them that anyway. Chapter 25. Zoey lay on her side in her bed, being clutched tightly from behind by her mother. Zoey found herself clutching her two very confused cats. Her left foot was in a carbon fiber walking boot, and her toes had gone numb, as the device administered steady blasts of cold to keep the swelling down. A full medical team had been waiting at the house when she'd arrived, summoned by Will via an obscenely expensive service that specialized in house calls and discretion. Zoey sensed the operation wasn't totally above board. For example, the doctor just dispensed the pain medication from his pockets, but she wasn't going to question it.
I used to read about Arthur, whispered her mother. When he was getting big, making all of his money, turning up on TV for this scandal or other, and I would think, there's somebody who's never going to be an old man. He's going to burn out too fast. He had this voracious appetite, like he was trying to eat the world, and I thought one day he's just gonna pop. He'll wreck one of his $1 million sports cars, or die in a shootout with a rival, or OD. But I always thought that, on some level, he'd deserve it. Not because he was bad, but because that was the life he chose, to keep biting off more and more. But that's not you. You wouldn't deserve it. Don't they know that?
Her mother pressed her face into Zoey's hair.
Whatever you have to go off and do, she said to Zoey. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. I know better. I don't know. I just hope you don't get addicted to it. To this life.
Me too.
So what can I do to help?
Vote tomorrow. Convince other people to do the same. And not for Leonidas Damon, just to be clear. Zoey's phone alarm went off.
What's that?
I scheduled exactly 20 minutes for us to be traumatized together. Now it's time to get back to work. The rest of the team is waiting. Zoey had told the suits she was in no mood for the Buffalo Room, so they were meeting in the conference room instead. Then she regretted it the moment she entered, and was greeted with the empty chair in Bud's spot. Will, Echo, and Andre were already watching a monitor on which Leonidas Damon was giving an impromptu press conference in front of the rubble at Carnivore Techs. They were 3 exhausted people, plus Zoey, who felt like she was operating at about 12% capacity. It didn't look like they would be capable of preparing a nice dinner, let alone, well, whatever the hell they were about to do. Of course, details are still hazy, Damon was saying on the monitor, and will probably remain so, knowing who is involved. But what is clear is that one particular woman in this city was simply pushed past her breaking point. Of course, I don't condone an act like this, but what do you expect? This citizen, who called herself Harmonia, sacrificed herself because the depravity of this city drove her to it. That you can't even trust the food at restaurants like this one did not contain the very flesh of our neighbors, our children. Outcomes like this were inevitable. How much can the citizens be expected to tolerate before they say enough? Zoey asked, why does this guy get to make a speech uninterrupted when the reporters who accosted me outside the restaurant kept shouting questions at me like this was all my fault? I had blood on my face. Echo said, you did well, considering. I mumbled something about how Damon sucks, and I honestly don't remember what I said after that. Specifically, said Andre, you said that you hope Leonidas loses tomorrow, and then, quote, has his scrotum pecked away by crows so that he can't reproduce. Oh, wait, I guess he already has kids, doesn't he? Well, whatever. I'm going to go take a bath. We've all watched the video.
Many times, added Echo.
Now, as you know, continued Damon on the screen, there was an attempt on my life, and on the lives of my family on Saturday night. I am pleased to say that the man responsible has been arrested, and hopefully will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He, along with everyone who collaborated with him, everyone who enabled him, everyone whose wrongdoing would have gone unpunished had he succeeded. Tomorrow, we're going to send a message that the grown-ups are back in charge, that you can once again feel safe walking these streets and eating from these establishments, that newcomers can feel safe moving here with their children, knowing they won't be snatched away to be sold on the streets or ground up and sold for food. Zoey said, So that's his whole campaign now? The cannibalism stuff? Will sipped his drink and said, With the bombing, it's now dominating the news. You can't talk about the bombing without talking about the bomber, and the bomber was Soylent Black. At that point, it's just a matter of spinning it so that we don't get sympathy as victims. Which we won't, because we're having this conversation in a $100 million estate built with crime money. Is there any update on Wu?
Still in surgery, replied Echo. And, I'm told he will be for some time. There's a lot to fix.
We're going to get him back to normal, even if we have to saw off my legs and sew them on him. Or Will's leg. I guess mine wouldn't look right. These people, continued Damon in a tone like he was building toward some kind of climax, they mistake our charity and goodness for weakness, but we'll show them. We'll show them how hard and how quickly we can strike when it's our very civilization at stake. That drew some hoots and hollers from supporters as Damon raised his fist and walked off. The news feed cut to another story, showing candles and flowers placed around a dumpster near the bombing site, the pavement around it scattered with brick fragments. An odd footnote to tonight's tragedy, said the voice of the news streamer. Fans have gathered around the trash bins outside of the blast site to mourn Bandito the raccoon, who became a major Blink celebrity after a local teenager attached a harness and camera so that fans could track the animal's adventures around the city. Bandito was known to raid the garbage cans outside of Carnivore Tech's for scraps, and fans say he was just feet away from the woman when she detonated her device. Andre suddenly looked up. Oh man, not Bandito. He used to come eat out of our bins. The little guy drummed up a ton of business for us. People would see the rib bones in the garbage and say, must be pretty good. No meat left on 'em.
You might not feel so positively toward him, said Echo, when you hear that Bandito's death is now trending higher than anything else involved with the explosion, and Bud's name barely comes up.
Nah, Bud would have thought that was hilarious.
To be clear, said a new voice from the doorway, I do not work for you.
Dee Dee, said Andre, you came. Yes, the empty chair you see was Bud's, and no, there's not some big symbolic meaning if you choose to sit in it. When Zoey showed up after Arthur passed, she sat in his old chair, and nobody thought twice about it.
I'll stand, thank you.
She wasn't in her vigilante costume, but the black vest she wore over her sweatshirt looked tactical. Zoey wondered if Dee Dee wasn't always wearing something that could stop a bullet or a blade. Zoey said, The coffee's brewing, if you couldn't smell it. You know it'll be good because I pushed the button myself. All right, so what exactly do you people do? We have to create a story, right? To swing the election and save the future? Something that can fool a whole city, a whole country? That's right, replied Will. I'm giving us 30 minutes to come up with it.
If Arthur was alive, said Echo, the strategy would be obvious. In fact, he'd say the easy play had been handed to us on a silver platter the moment the bomb went off.
She looked to Will.
Right?
Will nodded. It was somebody on Damon's side who killed Rex. If we go public with Rex's death, it rallies Rex's people to our side, motivates them to turn out higher than their polling. That could be enough to turn it. And all that requires, said Zoey, is for us to turn sadistic sex monster Rex into a martyr, a symbol for our cause. So all the women he's hurt, the ones he drove into hiding, and Dee Dee here, they all sit and watch us go on camera and sing Rex's praises, talk about this hero to the working folk who was cruelly taken away from us by the evil Puritan radicals. That's what Arthur would have done, said Echo. Nobody said that's what we're going to do. But then we're stuck. Rex's people are going to figure out he's missing. When they go looking, somebody is going to find out Dee Dee snatched him. For good reason, Dee Dee, I agree with you. But then, when it comes out that he's dead, it's going to get pinned on her, which means it gets pinned on Alonzo, and his fans are going to revolt, and Damon will win by 20 points. One day, said Will. We will have one entire day, during which Damon is going to use the Catharsis riots and the Carnivore Tex explosion to feed a narrative of a city out of control. Okay, replied Zoey. So we have to blow all of that off the headlines, somehow. We have to give the world a better story. Something nobody on either side can take their eyes off of. And we need to come up with it in the next, 26 minutes or so. Is the coffee done yet? Andre shouted some commands, and a holographic drawing board appeared in the center of the conference table. He drew 5 letters with his finger, and they hovered in midair, in glowing orange script. AIDS. Since we have somebody new, here's a quick intro into selling anything, including an idea. You lead your customer through 5 steps: attention, interest, desire, action, and hopefully satisfaction. If you've got yourself a billboard on the side of the highway, you hope to get the customer's attention and then have them follow all those steps to buying your car or wristwatch or what have you. Echo said, In our world, we work backward. Start from the state of mind we want the voters to be in at this time tomorrow. How do we want them to feel about Damon and Alonzo and themselves? Then we work back to what action they can take to bring that about. What desire would cause them to take that action, and so on. Dee Dee sighed. Already this sounds like I'm being taught the dark arts by minions of Lucifer himself. Now you're getting it, said Andre, as Zoey handed him a mug of coffee. All right, said Echo to an exhausted room, 34 minutes later. Here's the shopping list I've written down. 2 high-end, ultra-realistic female sex dolls, 2 pig carcasses, several hundred large white feathers, the lower half of 1 male human cadaver, as many white robes and identical masks as we can find, at least a gallon of fake blood. It has to be real, interjected Will. At least a gallon of real blood. The list of machinery and parts that Andre has written on this napkin, and finally, a group of competent people to help us put the project together, who can be trusted to keep a secret to the death, who happen to be available right now. And that's what we need to, just let me double-check here, swing a mayoral election by several points. Am I missing anything? Before anyone could answer, Zoe's phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Hi, Aviv gave me your contact. Hope that's okay. I'm Sig, Aviv's project coordinator. A is in big trouble, and we're all pretty scared here. No, this is not part of the act. None of this is. Zoey replied, I was there when he was arrested. He had the chance to avoid it, but said he was giving up willingly. It all seemed pretty polite. Sig, haven't you heard? He never made it to the police station. Zoey, he escaped already? Sig, no. Someone came and took him, and we don't know where he is. The Suits and Dee Dee saw Zoe's reaction, and, with some trepidation, Echo asked what was wrong. The amazing Aviv is once again trying to make it all about him, this time by getting disappeared at the hands of, Damon's people? Somebody trying to cash in on the bounty? His team is insisting it's not a stunt. Zoey thought Will would be exasperated by the prospect of another crisis crowding its way onto their to-do list, but instead, he looked oddly intrigued. Will said, News of this has to have made the rounds by now, at the very least among other bounty hunters who've lost out on the payday. Echo and Andre both took to their phones, seemingly in a race to see who could come up with it first. Andre apparently won. "Who's Pistol Wizard?" Zoey covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God." Echo said, "He broke Aviv out of police custody. And by broke him out, I mean the cops pulled the paddy wagon over and allowed this idiot to take Aviv in exchange for some amount of money smaller than the bounty." Zoey let out a theatrical sigh. "Where is he holding him?" "Unknown." "So what do we do?" Will said, "Pistol Wizard may be doing it for the bounty, but posting the bounty itself was insurance. The idea is that if Damon loses, a city run by Alonzo would make the charges go away. In other words, if Damon loses, he quietly has this guy kill Aviv." "Actually," said Andre, "I assume that if Damon detects we're screwing with him and senses that we've gotten the upper hand, he'll tell the vigilante to kill Aviv out of spite. Or he'll try to use that as leverage, if he feels backed into a corner." Zoey turned to Will, who was doing a poor job of hiding the fact that he regarded all of this as possible good news. "I take it you think this guy is doing us a favor by keeping Aviv off the table and unable to do whatever nonsense he had planned for tomorrow? And if he dies, that's just a minor side effect?" "Zoey, we've spent this whole meeting lamenting that we're short on people. Aviv has support staff." "Ah." She composed a reply to Sig. "Zoey, how many people does Aviv have on his team, and are they busy right now?"